Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you. So today I'm going to talk about government grants. Holistically, it's something we all hear about, and we read in the newspaper about companies receiving funding, and often we're looking at it thinking, why isn't it us, or how can we obtain funding? So today I'm going to talk to you about the secrets, hints and tips on how to get some government grants, because I guarantee you if you're not applying for it, your competitors most certainly are. So firstly, a little bit about Avant Group. We are an Eastern Coast consulting team that specialises in government grants and funding, business advisory services and marketing strategy. We assist businesses in the identification of grants that they may be eligible for, then also the entire application process, compliance and ongoing management of their funding programs. We're independent, so we're not a law firm, we're not an accounting firm, we really are a government grants pure play business. Our team is technically skilled, so we have a team of engineers primarily and marketing experts with backgrounds in both aerospace and mech eng. And we also have special approvals from the government to run a number of programs, including the Export Market Development Grant Program, which I'll talk to you about later today, and also one that recently closed on the 12th of May, which we're anticipating to reopen, which is the Boost Your Business Voucher Program. So they're two, for example, that we run. So firstly, government grants for the manufacturing sector. You'll be a bit surprised by the statistic. I had a look at it yesterday, and through reviewing all of the platforms that we have access to, as at yesterday, there were just over 1,500 business grants that were currently listed as either open or pending to be open. In the competitive space, that's the largest area, there are about 1,400. There were some entitlement programs, which I'll talk to you about today as well, some loan schemes, and then also community trusts and foundations, which is an area that we don't actually specifically deal in, but sometimes we keep abreast of, about 3,500 grants in that space as well. So you can see that the opportunity is certainly there. It's just a matter of being able to mine through the amount of information that's out there and determining which one's right for your business. The first thing that's probably worth flagging is looking at what stages a company is at in its operational life cycle to determine when the government will actually give you funding in the first place. So there is small funding at that very early stages of startup area. So they are programs called New Enterprise Incentive Scheme. Then you move into the research and development process stage. Again, there's funding available there. When you start to hit minimum viable product or kick-off stage of the business cycle, unfortunately, that's where the government steps away, and basically they say, we've funded you up front, now it's your job to get into that growth period. And then when you actually start kicking off on sales, that's when the commercialisation schemes kick back in. And then there are also some growth programs to help you with business growth along the way. So we've been lobbying for a long time to try and get funding during that critical valley of death, but it is important that when you are planning, especially if you're in a startup environment, to make sure you do reserve cash flows to get you on that original trajectory to get the business up and running. So you're probably sitting here saying, so what sort of activities and what sort of businesses get funding for government grants? And it's pretty broad, but basically, if you're an Australian company with an Australian product or service and you're looking at exporting those goods, you don't have to be a current exporter, you just have to be investigating the export markets. There are grants available for that activity. If you're undertaking any research and development activities, so when I say R&D, that's really from a scientific perspective, which I'll touch on a little bit later today. Again, there's funding for that activity. If you're doing any major collaborations, which will result in you working with other businesses or universities, which may result in new product deployment, company growth, activities around research and development, there's funding for that as well. And then also if you're doing any major CapEx investments. So when I say major, typically the minimum grant project value they look at is around $250,000 plus. So if you've got a project where you're spending anywhere between $250K plus and you're looking for some assistance, if you tick those other boxes, i.e. you're an Australian manufacturer, very rarely is it a case that I can't get you funding for that. You must be in a priority sector generally when it comes to these advanced manufacturing style grants. So obviously manufacturing being number one, food and agri, medtech pharma, mining, equipment technology services, oil, gas and energy, and also enabling technologies for those divisions above as well. So you can see it's quite broad around the sorts of businesses that can get funding. Now, I'm going to talk to you today about the different types of programs there are. So, competitive grants. Now, competitive grants is when your application is put into a pool of funding against a whole myriad of other applications, and you're literally competing for that money, okay? So competitive grants are sector-based. So the government publishes throughout the year grants that might be based on geographic location or specific sectors that they're looking to fund, or the nature of types of projects that they're looking to fund. They're cyclical, so they're not open all the time generally. They typically open and close, and it's based on the amount of budget that the government has in any one of those cycles. I always say the government, it'd be nice if they did, but they never give you $1. They always give you part of $1. So you always have to co-contribute. They sort of say, we're putting our skin in the game, you put some too, thanks very much. So the co-funding is generally anywhere between 25% and 50% for a commercial business. Beyond that, some not-for-profits and minority sectors can receive funding of anywhere up to 75%. But for your planning, worst case scenario 25%, best case scenario 50%. They're assessed on merit. So, and a lot of the time the merit criterion really does focus on the technology that you're looking to spend the money on, and also potentially the amount of jobs and the value to the Australian or Victorian state-based economy that you're applying under. And then they'll compare your application against the pool of applicants in each funding cycle, look at how much budget they've got, and then try and spread the funding out amongst the competitive applicants in that particular pool. The big thing with competitive grants is the government actually lists the merit criterion that they want you to address as part of your application. So it really is a case of, one, checking your eligibility, making sure that you do meet the entry requirements. If they say the entry requirement is a minimum of 1.5 million turnover and you're not at that level, don't waste your time, okay? You'll get knocked out. So make sure you really fit into that box. The next thing is read the merit criterion. If they're asking you, how many jobs is this going to create? What sort of export markets is it going to enable you to grow into? These are the sorts of things that they're looking for you to respond to. So read the question, answer the question. It's a pretty simple formula. At the moment, it's actually a pretty tricky time to give you a good briefing today around the sorts of programs that are open, basically because we've got two gents fighting it out for the top job in Australia. As a result of that, it means we're in a fun stage called caretaker mode. It's for our business, it drives me crazy. But basically, there are a number of programs that are generally ongoing. They tend to change their name depending on who's in power, but they typically remain the same as far as what they fund and the nature of the activities. So the first one, there's the Regional Jobs and Investment Package, and also there's a RDV as well. So these are similar. If you're investing into any sort of capital infrastructure, even in other sectors like tourism, for example, but if it's a regionally focused activity and that's going to generate jobs and employment in regional areas, there's funding there for it. The next one's the Growth Fund. This is a national program, and this is around shared infrastructure. So we've worked on projects where we've needed to put in rail lines to connect to agri-businesses, for example. So anything that's a shared infrastructure project, there's funding for as well. The Future Industries program, so again, caretaker mode. The Victorian government is just about to come out of its budget cycle this month, and we're expecting that this will actually reopen. This is a Victorian-based activity for any capital expenditure that a business might want to invest in. This will co-contribute up to 25% for the CapEx project costs. This is a jobs for grant money for jobs program. So this particular program, they look at you to be in a future industries sector, and they also look at you to be investing to create jobs. So that's a key thing as part of the application process. Boost Your Business, recently closed. We're anticipating another round will open up fairly soon. That's a matched funding for soft cost services, 50K. And the Entrepreneurs Program, this is a federal scheme. I've got a little bit more data on that shortly, but the smallest is 20K for consulting, and you can actually get up to $1 million for the commercialisation of new technologies in this particular stream. Again, that should open up fairly soon. For anybody in the room, if you're in the automotive sector, you would have heard of the ATS, but for those of you that may not have, there's been funding to actually help with the transition of businesses that are providing services or manufactured goods for the automotive supply chain to help them transform their business out of that supply chain into new and emerging technologies. There's a new one that's recently opened called the Manufacturing Efficiency Fund for New South Wales. I thought I had to give New South Wales a nod in there as part of the programs. And this is up to 120K for energy efficiency projects. The Sovereign Industrial Capability Priority Grants, it actually reopened this morning. This is for companies that are involved in defence and want to grow or potentially get into the defence supply chain, anywhere between $50,000 up to $1 million for capital infrastructure investment. And I actually had a contact from New South Wales EPA. He found out that I was speaking today and I promised him I'd put his grant up on the slide, so here it is. This is the PIP. This is a program, this is around enhancing recycling technologies and also trying to fix the big plastic waste problem that we have in country. So the only caveat to this is you have to have operational presence in New South Wales. So I guess the reason that I've gone on and I've mentioned these grants, and it really is just a very small snippet around what's available to you, is just to show you how broad it is. So there's certainly opportunity, but they all require a project. They all require you to have to want to do something for the business, to invest in capital infrastructure, to grow your company, and obviously create jobs as a result of that. The next thing that's probably worth mentioning is specifically about the competitive grants space is time. So the application process takes a lot of time, anywhere between 3 and 6 months. You must apply first, get your approvals, and then you can spend your CapEx. It's not a case of, we just bought this machine, we'd like to get reimbursed for it. It doesn't work that way. So you've got to enable that time to actually make sure the appropriate fund opens, because they do come in cycles. Allow us time, or allow you guys time to actually put an application in, go through the assessment process, then get your approvals, then sign your order. So that's probably the hardest thing about a competitive grant, is just is waiting for the stars to align to enable you to put that application in. So if you're structured and you have future planning as part of your business modelling, then it's perfect. There's always an opportunity there for you. So basically where to look. I've put a sample of different businesses there. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. So basically this is a sample. So the state governments all have their own websites, and they've got some really good search functionality on their website. So if you do a little bit of a dig around, it doesn't take you long before you'll find the searches for the grants areas on each of the state and also federal. The business.gov.au website is brilliant as well. So they have a grants search functionality. There are some businesses out there that also charge you for accessing these databases, but realistically it's all available for free. So you shouldn't have to pay for it, but if you did want to sort of sit back and have it served to you, you can also do that as well. So that's competitive grants. Now I'm going to talk to you about entitlement programs. Now, entitlement programs are pretty much that. If you are a business and you are undertaking certain types of activity and you meet the grant's entry requirement for a particular program, then you are entitled to that grant. So this is the one that is the easiest to get, because basically it's money for jam. First one I'm going to talk to you about is the Export Market Development Grant. I don't know if anybody's actually applied for this one before, but it's been around for a very long time. So it's been running for about 20 to 25 plus years. This is a program that supports anybody that's an Australian-based service or manufacturing company to get their products or their services into offshore markets. The only caveat is it excludes New Zealand and North Korea. Okay, so poor New Zealand for being put into that bucket, but them's the rules. Okay, so this grant can give your business up to $1.2 million of funding over a period of 8 grants, which technically gives you 9 years of activity, and I'll explain that shortly. Again, government never gives you $1, they always give you part of $1. So the way that this one works is you add up your eligible expenditure. The first $5,000 is not reimbursed, and you get 50% of everything spent above $5,000. So for example, if you spent up to $50,000 on eligible expenditure, the grant that you'd be getting back would be 50 minus 5 is 45, divided by 2 is 22.5k cash back. I really should have chosen a better number to do that with, but I think that adds up. So basically this program, each year you spend your money, it's a reimbursement scheme. We add up the expenses, we then lodge it with the government. It's a heavily audited program, so obviously they're giving money away, they want to make sure it's being spent appropriately. They audit the application, and then you get your reimbursement. So the way that the grant works is you can get 9 years of activity and a maximum grant each year of $150,000, which is where you get your $1.2 million. The first grant is actually 2 years retrospective, and then it's every year after that. Now, if there's a particular year that you didn't spend much money or you didn't meet grants entry requirements for whatever reason, you can put it on hold. You don't lose that year. It just reactivates at whichever point you then want to continue. The big thing with this is once you've hit your second grant, so when you're going into your third application, which is technically your 4th year of activity, the government says, right, we've given you funding, we've helped you on your trajectory into overseas markets, now prove that you're actually exporting. So in order to keep claiming, you actually have to have exports coming in to continue that claim process along the way. Hope that makes sense. So what can you claim under the export grant? This is the fun part, flights. So if you travel to anywhere overseas, excluding New Zealand and North Korea, you can get half your airfare back. If you're flying economy, premium and business, it's 50%. If you're flying first class, we can only claim 65%, of which you get half back. You also get an allowance of $350 a day for every day that you're away per person per trip, up to 21 days. That's to cover the costs of meals, accommodation and incidentals. You can also claim the costs of overseas representatives. So if you're an Australian business and you want to put somebody in an offshore market to sell your goods or services, you can get up to $100,000 cash back. So you can claim up to 200K. It gives you roughly 100 grand back each year to cover the costs of their marketing office, their infrastructure and their salary. You can also claim the cost of paying to bring buyers into Australia. So, for example, I know it's a manufacturing week, so there probably aren't many wineries here, but if you did have a winery and you wanted to bring some buyers in to have a look at your winery, the cost of actually bringing them out and hosting them is also eligible as well. Local marketing consultants, you can claim up to $50,000, which gives you 25K cashback. Promotional trade shows. So this National Manufacturing Expo, technically, if you've got a display stand here, we can actually claim your attendance whilst, even though it's in Australia, we're able to apportion it based on the international visitation statistics, which might not be much, but it always adds up. But if you were then to take this and then take it offshore, we could claim it at 100%. Promotional materials, so if you have website development costs, Google AdWords campaigns, marketing collateral, print brochures, etc., all of that can be claimed as well. The other one that's actually a lot of people do claim as well is IP registration costs and patents. So you can claim up to $50,000 under that category as well. So this is a brilliant program. As I said, it's been running for a very long time. It helps companies to invest in the expansion into offshore markets, and as a result of that, it creates jobs in country. So if you haven't claimed the EMDG and you are looking at going into offshore markets, I would highly recommend involvement in this program because it's brilliant. The Entrepreneurs Program, this again is an entitlement-based program through a few streams, and then it also has a competitive stream as well. I'm only going to touch on this briefly because, as I said before, this is a federal scheme and we're in caretaker mode. The Entrepreneurs Program 10 years ago used to be called COMET. It then got called the Commercialisation Australia Program. It's now called the Entrepreneurs Program. So generally the flavour is the same, but depending on the government that's in power, it changes name, gets relaunched, rebadged, etc. So I'll just touch on it. Again, you've got to be in one of those priority sectors to access this, but it also has a turnover requirement for entry. So that's one thing I didn't mention about the export grant. Anyone can apply, a trust, a sole trader, a proprietary limited business, and there are no turnover requirements. With this particular program, on the other hand, you have to have a minimum revenue of 1.5 million in your current or prior year in order to access this grant. Different for regional businesses. So basically it has a number of different streams. It includes complementary business evaluation services, which I've had a few clients go through this process and it's actually been quite valuable for their business. There's a supply chain facilitation service, which gives you up to $20,000 for soft costs matched, so 40 grand spend, 20K cashback. Business growth and services grant, 20K matched, and also there's a research connections stream, which roundabouts is through some different machinations. You can get up to 130K cashback. That's to cover the costs of, say, a graduate researcher, for example, or a PhD student in the business. Caretaker mode, to be confirmed. It'll reopen. It might change its name. Depends on who wins. Depends on who you vote for on the weekend. Research and development tax incentive. Now, I'm sure a lot of businesses have probably heard about this program. If you are willing and happy to, if you stay on afterwards, there's a lady by the name of Nicole Purser who'll be running a full session on this particular program. So because there's a proper half-hour slot on it, I'm only just going to touch on it and give you the good oil on this particular program. There are requirements around structuring. So firstly, trusts are ineligible to apply. You must be a trading proprietary limited business. Sole traders are ineligible as well. This is a program which is a tax-based incentive. It provides up to 43.5% cashback on research and development activities undertaken by a business. It's run in line with your company tax return. So what happens is we look at what you've spent in the particular year. At the end of that financial year, we add up those expenses, we put a hypothesis and a project report through to the government, through to AusIndustry. They come back with what's called an innovation number that then gets appended to a form which is lodged in line with your tax return. Now, the beauty of R&D is it covers everything that can be directly related to a research and development project as long as it can be substantiated. So this is like any tax return. Put whatever you want in it, go crazy, but you've got to be able to substantiate it if ever there's an audit. So it requires heavy levels of contemporaneous documentation, proof and evidence of what you're claiming and why you're actually claiming that particular amount. The other thing is around entry for this particular program. I always say a lot of people are always doing the D as part of their natural work. So every business is constantly developing. This one really does require the R to be attached to it. So that's that research element. So that's what's the scientific methodology that you're employing, what's the basis for the research element for a particular claim. So it's something to be aware of. So for example, let's say you're in startup mode and you've got no revenue. If you've spent $100,000 on wages, percentage of rental infrastructure, etc., on your R&D tax incentive activity, you lodge your tax returns, you're going to get a $43,500 cheque back from the government because it's a refundable offset. If you are running your business, you're under 20 mil turnover and you owe the tax department money, so you've had a profitable year, again, that $43,500 actually offsets against the tax liability. So it has a real cash benefit effect. If you're over a $20 million turnover, the rates change. It's dropped to 38.5% and it's a non-refundable carry-forward deduction. So again, a brilliant program, really designed at building that innovation economy in Australia. So one that if you're not currently claiming and you are doing eligible work, it's certainly worth investigating putting a claim together. The last one before I wrap up is I'm going to talk briefly about loan schemes. A lot of people don't realise that there are government loans out there to help you as well. So typically they look at that level of funding where if you are putting an application in to a bank or traditional finance and for whatever reason those traditional lenders aren't giving you the money, you can actually then go to the government for assistance instead. So it's worth keeping in mind. Clean Energy Finance Corporation, so they provide asset finance and they've got an innovation fund of over $220 million to help businesses with clean energy technologies. EFIC, the Export Finance Investment Commission, I'm constantly sending clients across to EFIC. They have some really brilliant platforms and opportunities for finance. The easy one is they provide a low doc loan up to $250K. It's a very easy online application, but it's a working capital guarantee. So you've got to have an order in hand for an export sale. This one does allow New Zealand though. But if you've got that order in hand, then they'll actually help finance that working capital. They also have larger finance streams for capital infrastructure or whatever it might be. But again, you have to be exporting or showing that you're very, very near exporting and that the finance has a direct nexus to your ability to actually export. This is one that I liked, which I thought I'd put in because it's kind of cool. So basically, the Sustainable Australia Fund, if you are a business and you're located in a specific geographic region, council, and you're looking at putting in clean energy technologies, including solar panels. So let's say you've got a giant factory and you want to put solar in the roof of the factory. You can actually apply to the Sustainable Australia Fund and they'll provide up to 100% funding for the hard costs. They'll then give you a loan term of anywhere between 4 and 20 years, and it's directly tacked onto the annual council rates that you have to pay each year. So you can then do deals with your landlord or whatnot to try and invest in solar. So solar's typically been one of those programs or options for energy savings, which the cost-benefit ratio is pretty tough. So it's hard to actually have that upfront investment and justify why you'd want to do it, whereas this particular program has stepped in and solved that issue. They do charge a very small interest rate. The last time I spoke to them, it was about 3.25%, so it's sort of pegged to whatever the interbank rates are. They're not about making money, but they have to be sustainable in their own right, so they do run as almost like a pseudo not-for-profit, if that makes sense. Also, if you're a business that's located in South Australia, there is a lot of funding available in that state for you. Most recently, there's been the Early Commercialisation Fund. This is a quasi-loan / repayable grant. So basically, they're giving you anywhere up to $1 million to help you commercialise a new technology, and you then have to repay that. If your revenue hits above $1 million, you repay it, I think it's at about 3.5% over the next 10 years. And if you haven't repaid it after that 10 years, they walk away. So it's sort of a grant, but not a grant. So I put that into the loan schemes for business area as well. That's, again, an example. There are a lot out there, but I sort of chose the big ones that I thought would be relevant for today's audience. And that's pretty much wraps it up today. So I've put my email in there as well. So if you, and it's just disappeared, but that's okay. So it's kate.whitehead@avantgroup.com.au. There we go. But I'd welcome any questions. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know. Yes?
So you just mentioned that with the election coming up, there's a lot of grants in caretaker mode. When are you actually expecting those grants to leave caretaker mode once we have a new parliament?
Yep. Okay, good question. So there are some that, whilst they're in caretaker mode, there are some grants that have been committed to before the election, so they're actually still ticking away and currently open. For example, the Sovereign Capability Program for those that are in defence. However, generally it takes about 6 months for the federal schemes to kick back off again. So I'm anticipating sort of in the last quarter of this year, we should see the proper larger funds reopening. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay. You're welcome to come up and say hello and meet me afterwards. And if you've got any one-on-one questions, happy to answer there. Thank you very much.